All right, I think we're ready to start. This is our third session of our series of Composing for the Organ webinars. I'm Laver, and happy to see that many of you are sticking with this afternoon. This third session is titled Finding Funding and Crafting a Compelling Proposal. And in it, we will examine the logistics of financially supporting your future projects. Now, this really is open to all creative people, not just composers or organists, but anyone looking for resources on how to support their creative work, although it will be focused in terms of the resources we're talking about, focused on organ or composition funding streams. Our panel for this webinar includes myself, you've met me, Natalie Draper, you've met Natalie, she can say hi.
Hello.
And Alexander Meszler, who is an alumnus of Syracuse University. He's also a current faculty member at the Mohawk Valley Community College, and he's a member of the American Guild of Organists National Committee on New Music. So he brings a lot of great perspectives, having reviewed many submissions and applied for many grants himself. So Alex, if you could say hello so everybody can see you.
Hi everybody, it's so great to be here. I love this topic, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Awesome. So the good news is that there are organists, there are organs and venues with organs all over the place. So there are plenty of venues that can receive your creative work. We do recommend, at least we recommend that you team up. So don't go it alone if you're a composer. Find a great organist or find somebody you know you could work well with if you're a composer. And then if you're an organist and you're interested in contemporary music, just reach out to some composers. And applying for grants as a collaborative team often will make your grant application stronger. So it shows that two people are invested in a project, and it will get your granting organizations to take note. If you're not sure how to start, just emailing somebody is totally okay. Just shoot a message to a composer you respect and ask. You never know what might happen. We musicians like to get opportunities, and you know, usually we're pretty friendly. You know, there are exceptions, but you know, you never know unless you ask, unless you send that email. So don't feel necessarily like just if somebody's in a prestigious position, they wouldn't have the time of day for you. You really never know. At this point, I want to turn it over to Alex, and he's going to talk a little bit about organ-specific funding opportunities and some of the really great opportunities that the American Guild of Organists has out there for new music.
Great, so I will spend some time talking about each one of these projects that the National AGO does, and then we'll go into some smaller opportunities. I'll break some down a little more than others. I hope that, you know, if you have questions about these at the end of the presentation, you'll ask. So the student commissioning project is the first that I really want to talk about. This is something that's affected me personally. Before I was on the Committee on New Music for the AGO, this is something I was awarded, not as a composer, but as an organist. And as Anne was talking about, this particular project focuses on getting one organist and one composer together to work collaboratively toward a conclusion. And the project's real goal is to expose more composers to the organ and to get the organ into the new music world and have just people experiencing the organ that maybe wouldn't have thought of it previously. And we've had some really successful projects come from this. So I was awarded one year, and then I actually loved the project so much that I did it again. And then the year after that, I loved it so much that I joined the committee. So when it was first conceived, there were 2 awards every year. It was one composer organist pair and another composer organist pair. And since we've had success enough and the application rates have gone up enough that we now have 4 awards a year. And each one of these awards is $1,000 split between the organist and the composer, which is not a whole lot of money, but it's definitely enough to give you a little bit of stimulation, a little push to get that project going. The real aim of this, again, as I said, is that the composer and the organist work together. So when you're crafting your application, talk about that. Talk about why the 2 of you are qualified or are good. You don't necessarily need to be friends, but you need to have a relationship that you've proven can work. When Dr. Laver goes into the grant application, maybe we can bring that back up. So that's the student commissioning project. Anybody that's eligible, it needs to be enrolled in a accredited institution. So there is that restriction on that. The AGO Marilyn Mason Award in Organ Composition, the second one here, is a bigger award, and it's awarded once every 2 years. The prize is, it changes sometimes, but it's somewhere around $2,000 or $3,000. And it's for a premiere at the National American Guild of Organists Convention. And of course, the namesake of the competition, Marilyn Mason, she was a fantastic supporter of new music. And yeah, that's the Marilyn Mason Award. And then finally, the one that's very hard to pronounce, Ronald G. Porgozleski and Lester D. Yankee Annual Competition. This is every single year. Every single year, the National AGO Committee on New Music awards a $10,000 award to a composer, usually an established composer in their career, demonstrating some significant compositional history, but some young people have won it as well. So that's a really huge opportunity. Organ specific, $10,000 commission is nothing to blink at. So on the next slide, these are special project and chapter grants. I'm not going to talk about each one of these. You can explore these on your own, but what they are is more wide looking things that like, it's not just for new music. You can do all sorts of projects, but all of the ones that are listed here have specific new music things. So if you want to commission a work from a composer, this is a great place to go and get a chunk of your money or all of your money, whatever you're looking for, to help pay a really excellent composer to write a piece for you, or if you're the composer, to find the money to write a piece and get it premiered somewhere. So always check your own local chapter. These are the ones that we know about, but of course there may be many others. So always check. And then finally, other competitions and opportunities. These are more not organ specific necessarily, but sometimes there are opportunities. So check your denominational organizations in terms of church music. So like National Pastoral Musicians Catholic Organization sometimes has opportunities for composition, new music, Presbyterian Association of Musicians, etc. The Eastman School of Music hymn tune competition, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's every 3 years, I think. So the thing I would just add to this is explore, don't be afraid to look. I mean, I would say about 50% of the grants that I've personally received have been from sources that I never would have thought of going to. But if you can craft a proposal that's creative and, if something you're writing about has to do with space and NASA, maybe there's a science foundation that would be interested in that sort of thing. And I think Natalie's going to talk about that. She's nodding. And then one last one to add to this that I should have added before and I forgot about is the ECS Publishing Award. That's also through the National AGO the national organization, and that's for a choral composition with organ accompaniment. So that's every 2 years as well with a convention premiere. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I thought I would sort of give some opportunities and some things to think about from the composition end, and sort of starting with current students. I think one thing that students don't always realize is that there is usually internal funding at your academic institution that is put aside for you to do things like summer projects or to sort of bolster your career. When I was doing my doctorate at Peabody, I applied for 2 career grants during that time that they had set aside for students, and that helped me to go to a music festival, and it also helped me at one point with a recording. So those things are very useful. Which brings me to my next point, which is to make sure to really get recordings. I think that when you're a student and also when you're just out of school, but also just in general, that is how we build our portfolios these days. And having stuff up to date, having recent pieces that you've written, having recordings of those makes a huge difference in, I mean, it's kind of one of these things where like, you need that to then get more things. You know, you need to have a recording to show people what you can do, and then they're going to be more likely to invest in you and give you money to get your music performed in other opportunities. So, you know, I think definitely take advantage of the resources that your academic institution has to start that sort of portfolio building early so that you can then share those things later. And also, I mean, I'm not big into marketing, but we are in this increasingly digital world. And I think the sooner that you can get your music up on sites like SoundCloud and YouTube, you know, maybe you do the rolling score thing that is increasingly popular, or your website or Bandcamp or whatever, you'll find that the more that it's out there and the more that somebody can search for you and listen to your music, funny things can happen. You know, I put a piece of mine that had a rolling score up on Twitter at one point, and then a group that was in San Antonio reached out to me and wanted to perform the piece. So you never know. I mean, sometimes it's just luck, but it's really important to sort of have that digital presence so people know what they're getting into when they're working with you. Also just like to think about a little bit who you want to perform your piece and in what context it can be performed. You know, if you are linking up with a concertizing organist or somebody who plays in church regularly, that's going to provide a number of opportunities for your music to get out there, especially if you wanted to write something that's in sort of the sacred tradition. It can start having a very substantial concert life. I think that it was in Nico Muley's interview where he talked about the fact that if you write something in the sacred tradition or tangential to the sacred tradition, it really has the chance to live both in that world and in the concert world. Whereas if you just write a concert piece, it's a little harder to get it into the sacred world. So that's just something to keep in mind too. For postgraduate composers, and also including graduate composers for some of this as well. But again, there is the internal funding from your academic institution, especially if you're faculty. You know, a lot of the funding that we got for this program, you know, was through Syracuse too. So that there are resources available to you that you can look through through a variety of sources. Residencies have been a big thing for me, just in sort of finding the time and the space to compose. The format of them, for those who don't know, is that you typically apply and you go somewhere and you're living there for maybe anything as short as 2 weeks to maybe like a whole summer or something like that. And there are a bunch of them. I've done ones at UCross and Yaddo and iPark. There's also McDowell. And the one I put here, I thought might be more sort of pertinent to this because most of the residencies that are out there, you apply as a lone composer and you're just going there and you're working on your music for X amount of time. And it's great because you're being fed and it's all, you know, your living expenses are covered. But it's not something that you're necessarily doing with a collaborator. But Avaloq Farm has residencies for performers who select a collaborating composer. So if you were linked up with an organist and they applied for a residency there, that would be something to consider. Granting institutions. So there's a list there of some. I mean, there are more than that. But I just wanted to put those ones up there because they are all good sources of money if you have a project. The Music USA project grants often are sort of small project grants, but still every little bit helps. Chamber Music America, the performer would have to apply, but again, if you're linked up with a performer, that's a good option. Barlow Endowment is every year, and the composer typically applies for their sort of general commissions. And then you have the Frum Foundation and Guggenheim as well. And all of these, I'll just say sort of because some of these are a little bit more, I think, catering toward people who are slightly on, I don't know, like on the edge of being established to being, sort of mid-career composers as well. And it's not to say that you should always just apply to these, because you never know who's going to see your music. And I can't tell you the number of times I've applied to something and not gotten it, but then I know that somebody heard my music and liked it and is excited about, something that comes up later. So don't feel like if you sent something off and you didn't get the result that you wanted, that it was a waste of time. It's never a waste of time. It's so much of this whole process is just slowly, for you, building a network of people you're interested in working with and people who are interested in hearing your music. And that happens through the process of just getting your music out there. I remember people talk a lot too about like it takes 100 rejections before you get your first acceptance. So don't be deterred. I mean, it's sort of what George Baker was saying in his talk too. We have to take criticism and just try not to take it personally. Just keep applying. You never know. There could be you could have been really close for one of these and they just like only could give it to 5 people or whatever, and you were number 6. So, just keep trying is my main thing with this. So I will now turn this over to Annie to discuss the actual process of writing a grant proposal.
Okay. And I just want to say that we do have a handout with all this material prepared. I'm going to put it in the chat at the end because it's going to give away all the things I'm going to say right now. And it does have due dates for some of these competitions. The one I want to mention and draw your attention to is that if you are interested in the student commissioning project for this year, the due date is September 30th, 2020. So we hope that if you are even mildly interested in that, you grab a collaborator and throw something in for that by September 30th. But we will provide a list of all these resources in the chat towards the end of this this session. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that we are all US based folks here, so we weren't really thinking about European or Asian or African opportunities, and would like to hear from you if you know of things that we should share. One thing to note is that the American Guild of Organists, even though it has American in the title, there are chapters all over the world. So you can engage with the American Guild of Organists even if you are not in the United States. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some tips for writing a good grant proposal. And this is a sampling of some of our ideas, not everything we could say, but it'll get us started. And then if you do have questions or want more clarification, again, just put them in the chat and we'll have plenty of time to address those. So the first thing we want to say is do your research. This involves a lot of internet work, probably. So you go and look and on the websites of these granting organizations, and you find out what their focus is. You think about how your project might fit into what they're really interested in, and that might mean you just need to spin your project a certain way. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change your project. It just might mean you have to describe it slightly differently. So it's really important to figure out, what these granting organizations are really after. Is it education? Is it new music? Is it performance? Is it a sacred tradition? So all those things are really important. You should also check out who has received the grant before. And sometimes there will be the materials that that person submitted, like an abstract or a short description, or maybe if it's a piece of music, a video of that performance. So you can get an idea of what the granting organization supported in the past, and it might help you shape your own project. So that's the first thing. The next one is to describe your project in a meaningful and engaging way. So this means you have to think a little bit about what is exciting about your project. What's new about it? What are you offering that's different? Or is there a new platform that you're going to use to share your project that people haven't used before? Is there a special theme that you want to tap into? Is there a social movement that you can lift up with your project? So if you've got something, something that's kind of that'll grab attention of your granting organization, that's important to highlight, and it might be the thing that you use to lead with when you are writing your proposal. It's sort of like when you're writing a scholarly work. In your opening, you have to say, that you have a fresh perspective, or that you're addressing a lack of scholarship in a particular area. It's a similar thing with creative work. You want to think about the sound world that you are inhabiting. You want to think about your audience. Who are you writing for? Who do you want to hear your music or your project? And why is your project important? And if you can't articulate those things towards the opening of your proposal, then you may lose your reader. So I think of all those questions, maybe the number one is, why is your project important? And for musicians, I think music is always relevant, but if you can tap into a theme or something happening in the world or something like that, it will create even more relevance that you can explain. Sometimes you may be looking to present on a specific series, or like Alex, made the comment about NASA. Maybe there's some science-oriented body that might entertain a music project. You want to always, if there is a theme to the granting organization, you want to comment on how your project relates to the theme. So that's really a key. Okay, this next one, mention impact. All granting organizations want to know how many people you will reach. It is important to talk about numbers in this case. I think of our chapel here, Hendricks Chapel, on the campus at Syracuse, and we have a relatively new dean, and one of the things he started doing when he got here is made sure we tracked everybody that engaged with a chapel activity, everybody that came to a performance, everybody that came to a Bible study, everybody that came to a meeting, a knitting class, all that stuff. And, you know, by the end of the year, he's able to say 200,000 people engaged with the chapel this year. And that's a really compelling point of data that, that you can use for a granting organization. So when we translate that to the world of music, how many people do you hope will listen to your piece? Is it going to be a premiere which will only be live and in person, in which case maybe 100 people will hear it? Or are you going to record it and post it on YouTube? Or are you going to stream it? We've had a lot of luck applying to grants and mentioning that we are going to live stream the performance, and that gets them very excited because it means that the impact is beyond the local audience. It means that anybody in the world could tune in, and granting organizations really like that. So it's important to provide a realistic estimate of your audience, both in person and virtual, because it gives the organization a little sense of the scope of the project. The other thing that you can think about with impact is that a lot of organizations really love to see an educational component. So is there a way that you could demonstrate your collaborative process to a local school, for instance? Is there a group of pianists who are interested in the organ that somehow you can match up your performance by giving them a little demo beforehand or after? So an educational component is sometimes the thing that will make your project stand out. Another thing to think about is, are you able to connect with or raise up underrepresented groups in your proposal? And this is something that we're thinking about more and more with music education, and granting organizations have this on their radar as well. If you expect media coverage, you should talk about that. If you hope for media coverage, you can say that, you know, I'm going to write a press release. We have, or put in a budget for advertising, because we can do the greatest project on the planet, but if we don't get people to listen to it, then it's kind of, you know, it's too bad. It's a missed opportunity. And, you know, put yourself in the shoes of the granting organization. If they're hoping for maximum impact and they hope that their, you know, foundation name gets out there, they would like to see that you're spending some money on advertising, because it helps the name get out there. It makes makes the organization visible, and it gets more people interested in applying for the next grant cycle. And then the other thing in terms of impact is you want to think a little bit about how you're going to document and disseminate your work. So we talked about recordings. That's really important. You know, the write-up that Natalie and I did for the online journal Vox Humana was just, you know, it's basically us just talking about our process. But it's just another way to get visibility to the granting organization and to draw attention to the project. So you want to think about how you're going to share your work, and you might want to think about creative ways that you can do that that's not just the performance, these sort of auxiliary ways of sharing your work. By the way, you know, we published that that article and sent it straight away to the granting organizations that gave us money for this project. So you want to keep engaging that relationship. Okay, the next thing you want to think about is crafting a realistic budget. Now, this is fun. Musicians don't like to deal with money, but we have to, right? So budgets they're an important document. Granting organizations want to see that you've done your homework, and they ask for budgets because that's their way of forcing you to work through this process. So you want to try to get as realistic a budget as possible. Now, you may not have every single quote by the time you have to send your budget off. That's okay. But you want to do as much homework as possible. So some things to think about with your project: you want to think about a composer's commission. You want to think about compensating the performer. Maybe you're the performer. You want to think about how much it will cost to rent or get access to a venue. Now, you may be lucky in that you already have access to a venue because you're at an academic institution, or because you are an organist at a church or something like that. But maybe you want a special venue, and sometimes it costs money to make sure there's a sexton on duty, or make sure there's maintenance staff to let you in at the right time. So you just have to ask and see what is possible. And you can also ask, especially those types of institutions I just named are nonprofits, so they may be able to offer that in kind. You're going to want to think about printing and marketing costs. So if you are really good at graphic design, then maybe you don't need to hire somebody, but maybe you aren't, that isn't your skill, and you need to ask somebody to make a poster for you, or to put up a website for you. Or for instance, in our case, we had to hire a videographer and post-production help with the video that we did, because we just did not have time to try to figure that out on our own for tonight's virtual concert. And those can be considerable costs. If you are doing something in person, of course, that's not today's reality, but someday, again, we will have in-person concerts, and we will want to put on receptions, because that's where you get to mingle and hear how people felt about your performance or your piece. So put in some money for food and beverage. And then I just mentioned recording costs. It definitely is worth getting a high quality audio recording. So that's a cost worth spending money on. And those are the kinds of things that that a granting organization is definitely, many of them will want to help with that. If you don't know what a reasonable fee is, I think the best thing to do is just ask. So if you're unsure about what a composer would charge, just say, what's your normal rate? And they'll tell you. And if you can't manage it, well, then maybe you need to ask another composer. Or a lot of times, at least in my experience, people, if they like the project, they're willing to do it for a little bit less. So there's certainly room for negotiation with a lot of creative people right now. You can always ask for quotes from venues and vendors. So they'll usually, as long as you give them the information they'll need, they'll give you reasonable quotes. And then make sure if things change, you communicate with your vendors so that they may say, well, that's going to cost me more time, so it will be more expensive, and then you're ready for it. All right, another thing to remember is that if you, in your budget that you send to your granting organization, you put all those things in. If you're getting something for free or in kind, you should put that in the budget, because it shows that there is somebody investing in your project, even if there's not a monetary value assigned to it. Whenever I make a budget for a project, I will always put in, Syracuse University Creative in kind. That means our graphic design is covered, certain things like that. So it's really important to include those in kind sources in your budget. and any kind of funding you've already received. Don't try to cheat the system by saying, oh, we don't have any money for this, when in fact you already have a sponsor who has said they'd give you $1,000. It actually works in your favor to list other sources of funding, because it means that other organizations or individuals think your project is important and they're willing to fund it. And usually that's some granting organizations actually require that you find additional funding, because it just means that your project will have more impact. And last word about budgets is that you should always build contingencies. There are always, with every single project, there are unforeseen costs. There are things that come out more expensive than you thought, took more time than you thought, and by padding your budget in a few places, you can be ready for those things. That's a lesson that I have learned the hard way. So make sure that you put in, generous estimates for things, because it's always easier to use up extra money, than it is to figure out how to pay for things you did not intend. Okay, I'd like to go to next bullet, which is to get somebody to proofread your proposal. This is just good practice. It's a check to make sure that your funding request is clear, and you may get some good tips. So it's great to ask somebody that's done applying for things before to see if they'd have a quick look at whatever you are putting out there. And you want to think about your supporting materials and make sure they're very concise and engaging. It's not just that you're throwing a lot of information out there. You want to make sure it's stuff that it actually supports what you're trying to ask for. And then finally, it's really important to thank your sponsors and to submit your final reports. This is like an essential final step. Sometimes we think, oh, we got the grant, we're good to go, and then we forget about the follow-up. Well, some of these granting organizations will never grant you more money again if you don't submit the final report. So even if there's not some kind of formal process for submitting a final report, you want to at least send them a thank you and a concert program, or a link to a recording, or link to a press release, or something to show how you use that money and that you had good impact with the money. So don't ever forget that step. That's really key. All right, so we thought now we would open this up for questions. And so if you want to send questions, you can do that in the chat. And I'll also invite Natalie and Alex, if they wanted to chime in on anything just now, this would be a good time to do it.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to give, Natalie, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
I just want to give 2 additional thoughts, just little experiential things, very short. In terms of proofreading, use the resources that you have, right? Sometimes we're going to have a lot of resources. If we're a university student, we're going to have our advisors, we're going to have our teachers, we're going to have the writing center, we're going to have grant writing centers, all of these places. As we get older, we have fewer and fewer things, but we still have our colleagues. I applied for a Fulbright a few years ago and was awarded it. In the case of that particular grant, they're looking for something very general, something that's understandable through everybody. So I sent it to my advisor and my faculty, and I felt very good. And then I sent it to my aunt, and she sent it back. She says, I have no idea what any of this is, and I'm sure it's fine. And then you realize, no, it's not fine, because the people reading your grant are not musicians. So in that case, her comments actually became more important in some ways than my own advisors. So just think about that sort of thing. And then the other thing would just be related to budget. This is a hard thing to balance. but don't underestimate and don't overestimate. Your grant readers can see through your, you know what, you need to make sure that you make you provide a number that makes sense in the context of your proposal. So they're going to read your proposal first, they're going to look at your budget, and if you put $10,000 for something and they go, well, I could do that for 400, like, it's not going to work. So yeah.
Yeah, I would just add to that, just thinking about sort of realistic budgets, because the whole, I thought I'd just speak to like the composer commission, because it's such a fraught topic. I think in composer circles, a lot of the time, like we feel like, you know, we need to take our work seriously and value it and ask for a fair price. But at the same time, composers are writing, you know, like everything is so subjective, and we're writing in different styles, and we're writing at different times in our careers. And it is sometimes hard to know as a composer what to ask for yourself. And also if you are a performer to know what's a good thing to suggest as a commission fee. And so I just wanted to add that you should, I think, be sort of letting that be an evolving thing for you as a composer, like when you're younger, when you're a student, and when you're a grad student, and even when you're just out of school, think about what things are valuable to you. Like if there is an opportunity where you know that your work is going to be recorded, but you're not getting paid a commission fee, well, maybe the recording is important enough to add to your portfolio that you're willing to forgo that commission fee. But if that's not the case, then you might sort of wonder, well, okay, what is in this for my sort of like the longevity of my portfolio? So that's sort of not a very satisfying answer in certain ways, but I do think that that's an ever evolving thing for me, and I think that's okay. You know, you'll find that as you go on more and more, like, oh, this is what I can ask for. And New Music USA has, or maybe it's New Music Box, I think they have like a thing about sort of expected commission fees, but it's extremely high. It's like very aspirational. And, you know, that's just something to think about too, that, you know, there are things that we would ideally ask for in terms of how many hours we put into something, but be thoughtful about who you're working with and what their budget is, like what is realistic for them and what might be a good sort of trade-off in that scenario. So these things are very sort of context-based.
I think that that goes for performers as well. There's this there's a correlation with for organists, you know, between fee and the quality of the organ that you get to play on. So really nice organ, you're willing to take a lower fee because it's so enjoyable. But so I think, you know, there is a little bit of that. And I think you'll find that people are quite flexible if the project is something that's really interesting and compelling to them, or if the instrument is compelling, or the audience. You know, performers are sometimes willing to take a lower fee if they know that a lot of colleagues are going to be there to hear them. So those are all important points. So we've got some time here. Does anybody have questions they'd like to raise at this point? We can take them in the chat, or and while I'm monitoring that, I'm going to also share our handout. Again, this is just a starting place for a lot of these things. The other thing that we could say is, if anybody has gotten a grant that they would like to mention, or you know, something they've learned from the process, we can unmute you and allow you to speak about that if you so desire. Or we can just leave it here and have a nice break before 4 o'clock. That's also fine. We did get, I think maybe if you saw at the opening of this first session today, we received a lot of the grants that we've been speaking about. So the AGO chapters in Indianapolis and San Francisco supported this project, and they have a grant rotation that you can apply for 3 times a year. So actually they were open to providing a commission fee for Natalie to write a new piece. San Francisco was. And the Indianapolis chapter helped us with advertising and recording costs. So once you get one, you can apply to another and say, you know, we've got some funding already, and you know, we could use a little bit more to get the impact to go further. Okay, so we've got a question here from Matthew Slazik, and he asks, at what point might you decide to seek out funding for a project? Are there ideas that are more suited for that sort of thing? What do you think, Natalie, Alex?
Sure. I think that since I know Matthew's a composer, because Matthew's going to be in our composer reading session at 4, I think that there can be a range of things, but say like you wanted to start putting together an album, that would be certainly a good thing to start sort of looking for resources for, because that's exciting to some of the like new music granting institutions that I mentioned before, like New Music USA. Like if they can be part of the contributing source for that process starting to happen, that's exciting for people. But also maybe you want to put on a concert, you know, of your music. That's another thing that can be a good, I think they need to be sort of, you know, projects that are stepping stones in your career, whether that is a concert of your music or an album or the sort of commissioning of a new piece, and anything that where the nice thing about all of those is that they demonstrate that you're working with other people and that you're trying to achieve reach, you know, the impact that we were talking about earlier. So then you can sort of pull in other people who are involved in like in a concert of your music, all the performers, and see what resources they might be able to reach out to too. Or if you're wanting to do an album, that's obviously going to involve a performer or multiple performers as well. So I think all of those things are sort of typical for composers. It might be different on the performer end, and I'll let Annie and Alex speak to that.
In terms of as a performer, I think for commissioning new music, I mean, a lot of the grant writing I do is for research, but when it comes to new music, I think that point that you search for funding is actually pretty early on. You know, if I'm interested in commissioning a composer, I need to do that on the front end. I can't ask them to write a piece and go, oh, you know, maybe later, you know, unless that person's like a very close friend. So I would just say, you know, don't be afraid of using grant writing as a way to help develop your ideas. This is a little unrelated to your question, but I wanted to say it anyway. I don't know how many grants I've written and either submitted and not gotten, or not submitted because I decided it wasn't good, but then use that writing later to get a grant that did work out. So yeah, I think that answers your question, and then I went off on a tangent.
Well, one thing also that's worth mentioning for student composers is that you can write one of these grants for a degree recital. There's nothing to get in your way to doing that. And sometimes there will be the case when you don't have the performers that you need. Say you've written you know, a piano quintet, and you need a really great pianist, and everybody's busy at your institution, so you might have to hire somebody, and that's a place where you can, or a time where you can apply for a grant to kind of get you over the hump there.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing, which is just that, you know, especially when you're sort of an undergrad or a grad composer, that looking to your institutional resources for funding, you do have to write kind of like a grant application to them, usually talking about sort of why you want the money. And a really sort of smart thing to say if you wanted to use the money to get like one of your first recordings or get a professional recording or whatever, is to say that I'm going to use this money for that, which will then allow me to apply for X, or to reach out to sort of this fellowship or something like that. You know, so I think starting this process of having to articulate why you want to do the projects you want to do and why that's going to be meaningful is just a good thing to start early.
All right, I'm going to, I just want to post this handout in the chat one more time for people that were just joining us. I also got a nice comment here from John Milheisen. Pardon me, John. I'm going to share with everybody. He says, there are also funds available for composer-performer interaction with the public. Used to be through Meet the Composer, but when that organization and American Music Center merged to form New Music USA, that program was moved under New Music USA's general granting programs. You just need to indicate the funds are for interaction with the public, like open rehearsals, pre-concert talks, or interviews. That's a really great point, John. I appreciate you bringing that up. Do you have any experience with that, Natalie, with your stuff?
No, I haven't used that before, but I think that's a great point. And that kind of public interaction is, I mean, those are lovely ways to sort of get people more involved in the concert. And pre-concert talks are great. Interviews are great. The interviews that we did for this project, I think were a very fruitful thing for us. So, and people know that is going to be fruitful because that is something that affects a larger audience. So it's a great point.
All right. Any other comments or requests? We have a minute for those. I'm glad Matthew raised that question, and we're very excited to share a recording of his piece and 3 others. One's by Thomas Metcalf, Paulette Fry, who's with us right now, and Sam Gaskin. So we're going to be doing that shortly. Here's one more. Oh, okay, here's one more question from Kevin. Question is, are there any sources of funding for writing sacred music for SATB plus organ, or are most specific to organ music in particular?
Yeah, the one that immediately comes to mind is the one that I didn't include on the list.
Right, I added it to the handout, so it's on the handout now.
The ECS publishing from the American Guild of Organists is a annual it comes every 2 years, and it comes with $2,000 to $3,000 in prize money, along with a premiere at the national convention. But aside from that, I would say turn your attention in terms of sacred music to those denominational organizations. They're going to have a lot of opportunities there, although that might not be specific to organ music and choral, but you'll find that a lot of times that type of music fits underneath that umbrella.
There is actually an interesting commissioning project out of First Baptist Church in Worcester, Massachusetts, and that link is on the handout as well. They ask for an SATB anthem with either organ or piano accompaniment. So you could check that out, as well as the one Alex mentioned. There are, they pop up at random times sometimes. So, if we learn about them, we're going to post them on our Facebook page. So if you like the Facebook page or follow the Facebook page, you can see those when they pop up. Natalie and I have also talked about putting a lot of this material up on a website in the next year. So if you do engage with us on Facebook, you'll see when that's ready. And here's another website that's a good resource composersite.com.
Yeah, I added that one. I mean, that's one that I think a lot of composers already know about, but just in case you don't, it's sort of a collection of a lot of the calls for scores that are out there and competitions that are out there, so that you can peruse that. Very often there are SATB things in that list, and things involving organ. So it's a good one to check out. I would say though, there are also some bizarre things that you will find on that site. Sometimes like people wanting you to write a very specific commission for a very specific theme and with very specific instruments and like no pay. So be savvy, you know, you do not need to just throw your music and your skills at any opportunity that comes along if it doesn't seem like it's gonna, you know, like if you don't get that and then you have a random piece for trombone and flute based on like some bizarre topic, it's hard to use that for something else. So, you know, look for the things that are, but if they have something that's SATB, that's great, because then you could write it and you could send it out to lots of other things as well. But Composer Site definitely has a lot of stuff up there, and they sort of show you based on category and also based on sort of what was recently submitted and then what's kind of what deadlines are about to close.
I'd also add just in terms of finding specific things for what you're trying to compose for. Look around. I sign up. I can't tell you how many listservs I'm signed up for in sort of random topics that I've then gotten funding for. You know, so just look around and read your trade journal and look for advertisements there. As Dr. Laver said, like things kind of come up. Like, you know, something in Minneapolis last year. There was I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was a choral thing, and then it goes away, and then it'll be back in 7 years or something. Just keep your eyes open and be open to trying things that aren't on these lists. And occasionally, I don't know, once every 4, 5, 6 months, I just do a wide internet search and just see if there's anything I didn't know about.
Here's an updated link for that composer site with that you can actually use to navigate there.
Yeah, I messed up. It has 2 S's. Sorry.
Okay, I think we will leave this session here. And, if you do have other ideas or even questions, you can reach out to Natalie or I. Our emails are up on the registration page for this whole series. We'd love to have your feedback about the webinars anyway. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to hear from you. And also, if you've got other ideas about grants and things that we should post on the Facebook site, let us know. Or post them there yourself, and we will accept them. So we appreciate that interaction. Any last pearls of wisdom from Alex or Natalie? They're shaking their heads. Okay. Well, thanks to you both. Thank you, especially Alex, for joining us on this, and for performing, recording the new work that we're about to hear, and at the 4 o'clock session, and also performing on the virtual concerts. Great having you back here. So, all right, one last chat. One last Composers Forum, another good link. Thanks, John. All right, we're gonna turn off our videos for a moment, take a stretch break, and get ready, make sure our recordings are all ready for the next session. We'll be back here and start that promptly at 4, because we've got a lot of great content for the composer reading session. We hope you'll join us for that. There's some really cool new pieces that we'd like to share. All right, thanks everybody.